welcome Gretchen Road, President and CEO of BroadPath.
Hello, good morning. My name is Gretchen Rohde. I'm founder and CEO of BroadPath. You may also know my associate, Kevin Jerns. He's brilliant and talented and 6'6", so he's hard to miss, but you'll see him around. I'm very excited about this next panel. BroadPath provides public relations and content development for technology and high innovation brands. And we've been working with a lot of AI clients, and many of them who are helping shape the future of healthcare. While recently a lot of the hype around generative AI has us discussing what's going to be going on with ethics and risks related to artificial intelligence in healthcare, big data and other advancements has, years ago started all of us on the path of developing the solutions and technologies for artificial intelligence in AI. In those solutions and in that time, we've started to see, and we've seen the early results of what has been tested and trialed and deployed, and there's definitely good proving ground to say that AI has been delivering really audacious improvements in all sorts of areas of healthcare, including early prediction of disease trends and better administration and payments for healthcare, expanded visibility of what's going on, and definitely speeding drug discovery. We have yet to really know how AI is going to play out, how we will allow it to play out into its full evolution in healthcare, but there's really no better person to lead us on that conversation than Dr. Scott Snyder. Dr. Snyder is a fellow long-term PACT supporter back to probably the back to the Eastern Technology Council days, potentially. And he is a senior fellow in the management department of Wharton School and chief digital officer of Eversana, which focuses on accelerating the life sciences commercialization model. So Scott and company, come on.
All right, let's do it. Thank you, Gretchen. Appreciate it. I guess I'll go on this side. Cool. How many folks from the healthcare industry do we have in the room? Just to get a little show of hands. And obviously, everybody's a patient and a consumer of healthcare, so one way or another, we're going to touch you in some shape, form in this panel. So I'm super excited about this because I'm actually a tourist in the healthcare and life science industry. I've been in and out of it, and now I'm back in it at Eversana. And Gretchen mentioned, I like to think of us as a billion-dollar startup that is changing the commercial model to bring medications and devices and even digital therapeutics to market faster and cheaper. And so given we touch the entire value chain, you can imagine there's a lot of things we're thinking about in terms of using AI. And I'm super excited about our panel because I think we pretty much hit almost all aspects of the healthcare value chain. So we've got Sean Lane, and we're going to have these guys introduce themselves, but Sean's from Olive, really cool, exciting, really AI-first company that was born that way. Matt Winkler from Takeda, who's really trying to solve some of the new ways to engage patients in HCPs, coming from a pharma company. So anxious to hear about that, especially in the oncology space. And then Irene Rommel from BioCurie, which is a really neat company that's attacking, I'm sure all of you, if you live in Philly especially, have been hearing more and more energy around cell and gene therapy. And so exciting to hear somebody that's attacking really the input side of that, the manufacturing and the R&D side, and how do we make that more efficient. So just a couple of things I wanted to kick us off with before we do the intros. I don't know if anybody, especially in the healthcare side, read a recent article in JAMA, and they did a study, and they actually looked at, for 550 patient posts on social media, they had a physician response. And then they had a ChatGPT model provide a response to the same questions, and then they had patients rate the responses. 78% of patients preferred the ChatGPT response to the physician response. Not only that, the ChatGPT response was viewed as more thoughtful and high quality and more empathetic. And they averaged 220 words in their response versus 55 for the doctor. So maybe you can blame that on bedside manner. But Peter said, we're not in the normal anymore. I think that's a really interesting early signal that things are changing and maybe opportunities to interact in new and different ways for sure. I think the other thing, and we're going to get into it on this panel, probably 3 areas we think a lot about at Eversana. The opportunity to change how care is delivered. We're seeing AI being deployed in the front lines. So things like detecting stroke in an emergency room, which is so critical, minutes matter. And we now have companies like Viz AI that are taking that from hours down to minutes. And that's aiding physicians to get to that diagnosis faster and obviously restoring the patient's health faster. We've seen it drive real impact in R&D. So companies like Chemistry 42, Atomwise have raised a lot of money. And more we're seeing companies like Accenture that are taking the R&D cycle time to get to a target down as much as 80%. Significant, especially when we're all trying to battle the cost of bringing these drugs to market. So those are just a couple of examples, and given we have everything in the value chain, including a full-service agency, things like synthetic content, and being able to use generative AI to actually create, say, a version of a video of a physician with no actors in 60 different languages with 40 different contexts and personalize that for each interaction to educate patients. That video would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a studio, and we can now produce that in hours. So it's going to also get us to rethink the agency or even brand marketing side of pharmaceuticals. So that's a little bit about what's going on at Eversana, how we're thinking about it. I want to kick it over to our panel because we've got some amazing folks here. And I want you to first introduce yourself and talk a little bit about really how you guys are framing and using AI in your company and your role. And we'll start there. So why don't we go with you first, Sean?
Thanks, Scott. So again, my name is Sean Lane. I'm the CEO and founder of Olive. We've been around for about 12 years. We focus in automation and intelligence. So we have kind of dropped the artificial piece to some of our earlier speakers. We think it's just important to call it intelligence. In healthcare and very specifically in providers, so the healthcare providers in our country. And even more specifically, we look at the kind of operational side around finance, revenue cycle, patient access, things like that, where we think automation and intelligence can have a pretty dramatic impact. So, first I think I want to address the kind of ChatGPT world that we now live in and really answer what has changed. So I think it feels like suddenly this thing came about, and really want to kind of demystify that a little bit and hope that it's helpful. When I come to these, I have kind of two goals in mind. One is that everybody learns a little bit and that someone does something that they didn't do before. So in natural language processing, traditionally, we would use kind of the state of the art were LSTMs, and these were models that they're neural networks that would look at a sliding scale of language, a sliding scale of text, or a window, if you will. And it would look a little bit at the past, and then it would be able to generate text in the future. And that window would move, and it basically only have certain context. And then a paper was generated a few years ago that introduced this concept of a transformer. And the transformer has now been implemented in very, very performative ways to look at the entire context of these language models. So all of the history of what you're communicating to the agent in this case, and be able to provide much more cogent responses to a wide variety of questions. So that's been really exciting. So GPT, is a generative pre-trained transformers, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. So how does it apply to healthcare and how are we using it? First and foremost, I think it's important to realize that the open AI GPTs, so if you think about like GPT-2, which was trained on hundreds of millions of parameters, and by the way, parameters are just like numerical values, they're weights effectively inside these large language models. So, and then GPT-3 came along, it was a little better, it was trained on, in the 100+ billion parameter range. I think 175 billion is the latest kind of estimation of parameter size. And the more parameters that get added, performance increases. It's really not known what GPT-4 is from a parameter perspective, but a lot of people speculate that it's about 1 trillion parameters, which just seems astronomical. But all of those models are public models. That means the data is public. So you can't take PHI and feed into OpenAI's kind of GPT large language models. That's a really important thing for, I think, folks to understand. In order for us to use these models in a world in healthcare where we're taking PHI from claims data or medical record data and feeding it into one, we have to be able to bring it down into the enterprise. And strangely enough, I think there are a couple ways to do that today. The first, and probably the most widely used way, is a thing called Llama. Llama is another large language model, actually built by Facebook. But Facebook's model is trained on the smallest size, about 75 billion parameters, and up to about 150 billion parameters, depending on which model you take. You can pull it into your environment. So you can pull Llama completely into your GCP or your AWS or your Azure environment, your high trust environment, your SOC 2 accredited environment, and start fine-tuning it and training it on your specific data. So in this case, you could take like claims data and feed it into Llama and start getting some performative results. Now, it's about at the BERT or GP2 level, but it's still usable. So there are more to come. I think Google's working on some very interesting stuff in this vein. I think Bard is going to have an enterprise version that's going to be very, very interesting. But to get started in this, you got to find a large language model that you can pull into your environment and start training it on whatever data you have access to. That's what we're doing at Olive. We're doing it with claims data. We have the largest kind of semantic graph of claims data we think that exists, and we're using that language as the basis of our language model.
Cool. Thanks for that great intro. We'll definitely come back to that as part of the discussion. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So my name is Matt Winkler. I work at Takeda Oncology. And I'm currently responsible for using digital innovation to improve customer experience. I just recently joined the organization about 6 months ago. We were part of a new group called Data, Digital, and Technology. And why I think that's important in the industry is we really sit and emerged within the business. And we are leveraging a variety of best-in-class technologies to be able to really tackle some of the greatest challenges that we see within the business. So my specific responsibilities are leveraging a next best engine to be able to drive recommendations, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're trying to revolutionize best-in-class experiences, both in marketing, sales, and all the channels that our customers are going to interact with. In addition to that, I'm responsible for our marketing tech stack. I'll kind of build a little upon what Scott had mentioned, because this is really exciting times for marketers. In addition to that, I have responsibility for our websites and also all of our digital campaigns. So think about really the front-facing interactions. Within our group, I work really closely with our data management team, because you're going to find data is really core to what we do. Prior to joining Takeda, I worked at a consulting firm, IQVIA, and similar to Scott, my background there was not only working within the omnichannel space, but also managing data partnerships, because data really is that foundation that we built AI models. And so some examples of how I kind of use that experience today in the work. We're really focused on really trying to understand how we can utilize data to better predict the how disease progression is happening with patients. And especially in oncology, where we have the goal to be able to cure cancer, we realize that our medicines today are likely to extend life versus cure. But we do ultimately have that ambition, and we recognize that speed is absolutely critical to help informing both patients, their loved ones, and the HCPs in those interactions. And so we're really looking to how AI helps us in improving those experiences, whether that is giving vital information to our sales representatives who are preparing for who they actually talk to, how we actually arm our call centers with an ability to be in a position that they can have access to the latest medical information and clinical trials to inform whether that's at HCP or the staff. And frankly, now we're using even chatbots for those that actually visit our websites. And if we think about critical information for patients who are looking to get product from specialty distributors, how we can really revolutionize that, the supply chain to ensure that we can actually improve getting product and being able to meet the financial needs of customers. So those are just some of the examples that I'll get into a little more detail with around how we're using AI at Takeda.
And I can't wait to hear how we're going to put all the guardrails on it so we can pass the medical, legal, regulatory reviews, right? Irene, tell us about BioCurie a bit and your role and how you guys are thinking about AI.
Yeah, so good morning. I'm Irene Rombell, the CEO and co-founder of BioCurie. Just something that Scott said. So as you know, this is literally the birthplace of cell and gene therapy. So that's cell therapies, viral gene therapies, and nucleic acid-based therapies, and that's thanks to this amazing ecosystem of innovation here. And my background is, I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology, and I've been doing this for over 25 years. I'm going from academia. I was working on DNA vaccines over 20 years ago, then became a biotech hedge fund analyst, had my own consulting business, then joined J&J, and innovation was literally part of my title, strategy and external innovation, where I was looking for the most cutting-edge technologies and new therapeutic modalities. Then I moved to Spark Therapeutics, which is a pure-play gene therapy company. And along the way, I saw this amazing potential to really save human lives. And as you know, cell and gene therapies can literally cure these devastating diseases. But the challenge is that they're incredibly costly, difficult, labor-intensive, brute force hit or miss to produce, which means that today patients do not have ready access to these therapies. And in fact, up the road, we have CSL Behring, an amazing company, which has got the first gene therapy for hemophilia B, got approved late last year. It is also the most expensive therapy on the planet at $3.5 million per patient. Obviously, that is not sustainable. So how do we get these therapies to patients? Well, along the way, I've been following all the different technologies, and to me, big data and AI has been a way of really going from incremental improvement to really doing a step change and doing something really transformative for the industry. And this has been sort of my driving force over the last few years. And so back in 2021, I thought, okay, this is a great time to start a company. I think the technology is mature enough. We're finally getting relatively large data sets thanks to all these sensors, and the unmet need is there. Fortunately, at the same time, I met with Professor Richard Bratz from MIT, who was the world leader in AI, machine learning, and for process control and biomanufacturing. So together we founded BioCurie, and so here we are today. And so our goal is to have a scalable, intelligent platform like yourself. I realize that the word artificial is redundant and in fact misleading. And so we're creating this platform for development and manufacturing of cell and gene therapies. And in terms of our target customer, well, we work with biopharmaceutical companies and contract manufacturers, and of course, ultimately, it's the patient who's the beneficiary. We're very early stage, currently raising a seed round. This is an exciting time. We have a really transformative technology, and fortunately, I'm working with a leader in the world in this space. So I think this is incredibly exciting.
Awesome. So we've got AI on drug development and manufacturing. We've got commercialization, and we got care delivery and how we drive efficiencies and all of that. So I'm going to start with Matt and Sean. How do you think AI can potentially change the entire HCP and patient experience, whether it's the workflow, the efficiencies, or even just the overall impact or outcomes?
Yeah, I think I can start with that. I mean, this is really what we think about all the time. And today there's an incredible amount of unknowns, and there are an incredible amount of really uncertainty as a patient. And we call that things that are hiding in dark corners in healthcare. And our goal is to really shine a light on all those mysteries and try to create that magic that was talked about earlier for patients, for providers themselves. So the technology certainly exists to get there. As a patient, you shouldn't have to worry about their ability to find your coverage, for the providers to find your coverage. As a patient, you shouldn't be worried about prior authorizations. As a patient, you shouldn't have to deal with what comes after the visit from a billing perspective. All those things should be a pretty magical experience, and the technology exists to do it. And I think we're getting a lot better. I think we've made a lot of progress. It has been our fight for over a decade to try to help that change. And I think when you add in these really interesting, transformative AI capabilities, it really unlocks it at scale. And I think that's what's really exciting. So the question for all these capabilities is always like, how is it going to manifest? Because it could look really cool, the models could be great, the technology could be very interesting, but how's it actually going to manifest? And when I say that, I mean, like, how's it going to be in the process, in the workflow? Where's it going to live? Are we going to put it inside existing software? Is it going to be its own software? Are we going to add another screen? Are we going to add a thing on the side of the screen? These are the real discussions of how we manifest this artificial intelligence into the workforce, into the processes. And some of it will be completely invisible, as it should be. So I think the patient experience of the future, as fueled by artificial intelligence, will be very, very different than what we experience today. It'll be a lot more similar to our interactions with other industries and how we have come to expect commercial or retail to work.
So it's just like we now expect digital or e-commerce to just be part of our choice set. We're going to expect AI to show up in a lot of the experiences we interact with.
Yeah, if I could, let me give an example. So our goal is to basically remove the friction within the system. So just within the last month, I'll give an example around like our Here to Assist program. These are patients who are looking to be able to get approval from an affordability perspective and then have product directly shipped to their house. So typically that approval process and shipping has typically taken longer than 30 days. So think about the fact that you have just made a clinical decision and you want to start taking that cancer medication, but you have to wait over 30 days. We're really excited where recently we've been able to apply a lot of data, reduce processes and AI, reduce that to less than 5 days. So, that is just an example of one innovation that from an industry perspective, you look around, it kind of was acceptable for a long time. And just having a rethinking on how can we actually leverage. Now, I wanted to talk about other systems. So at Takeda, we're really across all aspects of business looking for ways to be able to integrate AI into our digital platforms. So I'll take an example of just how like ChatGPT has really re-energized this thought on rethinking sales teams. So from a CRM perspective, we have a couple CRMs, but one specifically dedicated to our sales teams. It's around using intelligence to help think about who they're call planning, thinking about which physicians that they should call on, managing across a number of different data sets to help optimize the availability of the doctor in that office, to help facilitate setting up that appointment, even reducing drive time, something simple like that. It's also arduous for our representatives to place information into forms. And so now we're using AI. When we can connect different data sets, we're actually going to make workflow a lot easier. Instead of requiring to put it into forms, they're going to naturally be able to scan things like email, meetings, open notes, things like that that actually help us make better recommendations to our sales representatives. So I have several other examples in marketing and so forth I'm happy to share with you, but thought I'd just give two examples there.
So a lot of this stuff is what we might call little I innovation, but not necessarily the big disruptive stuff, but collectively it can move the needle a lot, right? In terms of the experience, in terms of efficiency. Irene, talk a little bit about on your side where, especially in this kind of mashup of manufacturing and R&D in the cell gene space, where you think there's some real opportunities to move the needle with AI.
Oh, absolutely. So I think you mentioned two examples on the small molecule side with Accenture and Atomwise. So there are dozens of companies that are now using AI for small molecule drug discovery and now moving into biologics. So especially thanks to DeepMind, now we've got modeling tools for structure function modeling, so we can better predict what ideal small molecule and biologics can look like, which is great. And then the actual development and manufacturing is pretty commoditized. That's easy. For cell and gene therapy, it's the opposite, unfortunately. So relatively speaking, I mean, the discovery piece is hard, but relatively easy. The hard part is how the hell do you make this stuff, and then how do you make it reproducibly? And so you don't have to look very hard with a Google search to see so many manufacturing failures, and so that is where we're developing this technology, where basically you can significantly, make changes and do right first time prediction and production, and that is because one of the unfortunate things of our industry is we don't have large data sets. We certainly can't do neural nets, you can't do simple machine learning. You really got to start pulling in other modeling technologies like mechanistic modeling, for example. And so the hard part is, okay, how do you deal with what we fondly refer to as small, crappy data sets, which is what we have to work with. And so that's the challenge, but it's also the opportunity. So that's where this super intelligent, more sophisticated form of AI can really make a difference across the industry, I think. Then once you've got that optimal recipe for prediction, you can use it for process control, and now you're starting to put it into manufacturing, and then you're starting to think about, then the future is really biopharma 4.0, where you can ultimately take people out of the equation and have a purely, data-driven process that's very automated.
What's your goal? What's your big ambitious goal? Like, how much do you think you could reduce the cost of bringing one of these cell gene therapies through the gauntlet?
Well, yeah. So it's two factors. So cost. So today, I think we would be able to get the cost of goods more in line with biologics. But two, it's also that trial and error, the reproducibility, because it doesn't help. Ultimately, the patient needs their therapy pretty damn fast, right? So now you're seeing patients on fourth or fifth line cancer therapy. So they're this is their last hope, and they've got one shot at having their autologous therapy produced, and if they don't get it, they'll die. Yeah. And this happens all the time.
So it's accuracy, speed, and cost.
Accuracy, speed, and cost, and speed relates to cost, obviously, because it's all about NPV at the end of the day, right?
So Sean, maybe piggyback on Irene's comment about small data sets, because that's going to be true in a lot of enterprises, whether it's my call center logs, whether it's sales history. I'm going to probably start with smaller data sets. What are some advice of how to handle that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's not obvious at first that a small data set can still be used for something like a large language model. Because when you hear about it in the news, like, okay, large language models, billions of parameters, hundreds of billions of parameters, trillions of parameters. My data is really small, so how can it use that technology? And the reality is it can. So you basically have a base model. That base model would be created by OpenAI is creating, they have their base models. Google has base models. Facebook has base models. And the idea would be to take that model, put it inside your enterprise, inside your cloud, inside your high trust environment or SOC 2 environment, and then you could take your smaller, very focused data set and fine tune that model with it. So this can be done today. You can go get Llama, off of BitTorrent. You can start working with very specific data, and you can start fine tuning it. Now, there's challenges associated with that. The smaller the data, you could run the risk of over-tuning, which would effectively create what is being called catastrophic forgetting in the model. And when that happens, it's one of my favorite new buzzwords, but effectively it's going to forget the big base model, and it's only going to remember the attention layers, which is the stuff that you've basically added to that frozen model. So it can totally be done. You can do it, or your team can do it. You should have them do it, because we need to start learning how to fine-tune models today, because there's going to be an incredible amount of heterogeneity and variability with the capabilities of people to fine-tune these models, and you're going to have a lot of different people.
And also the quality of that small data set can matter, right? Like we build lookalike models on HCPs. I know, Matt, you guys do too, but if you have very high quality data on those physician profiles, that can be much more impactful in building a model off of that than having a lot of noisy data in a large model.
Yeah,
So.
but that's the problem. You don't have the luxury of having that clean data.
No,
You've got
you have-
crappy data, and there are so many different.
You have the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Crappy small data is what you're saying.
Exactly, but this also happens with patient data as well.
Sure.
So that's where the subject matter expertise is important.
So let's talk about the other side of this, because there's a lot of exciting opportunities here, and we'll get more to some of your aspirations and maybe those big eye opportunities. But let's talk about the guardrails side, because we are in healthcare. It is a regulated business, whether it's delivering care, whether it's developing drugs, or even bringing those to market. How do we build the guardrails in up front to be able to take advantage of these technologies in the right and responsible way? So I don't know, you want to start on that?
Yeah,
Go down the road.
I can start. So just a quick question, and this is awesome that I can actually ask this question and people know what I'm talking about. How many people have experienced GPT hallucination? Okay, right. So we got positive answers. So that's actually happened. So you're using ChatGPT or using some kind of 2 or 3 or 4, and you ask it a question and it gives you an answer, and you're like, that is not a right answer. If you want to experience it, go to ChatGPT. You can pick any tool that's on the consumer market, and ask it about a person. Ask it to just tell the background of a person, and you'll get some wacky stuff. Ask it about yourself, and you'll realize that for me, it had me going to schools I'd never been to. I did jobs I'd never done before. It was pretty interesting. So we have to really safeguard against hallucination, especially. It's one thing to ask how many denials did I have last month? What were the highest number of denials? And to get a hallucinating answer, it's a different thing if you're using it for treatment and diagnosis.
So does that go back to sourcing that Peter talked about, or even building detectors in, that are overt?
It's having people that's really good at fine-tuning and training these models. I mean, that skill set of fine-tuning and training a frozen model that is being generated by these large companies with incredible investment, because it costs a lot to create a model from scratch. I mean, I can't even fathom the cost. But you have to have a team that really knows how to fine-tune and train it. But I think what's going to happen from a safeguard perspective is, so these models are really good at actually producing code. So they can write SQL queries, they can write Sparkle queries, they can write queries to databases. So what I imagine will happen at first is that you'll be able to use generative AI to create the query, and then you'll query the relational database, you'll query the structured database to get a very specific answer that isn't subject to hallucination. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. Matt, safeguards.
Yeah, I think, to Sean's point, I don't have that technology background, but we do need to set up first permissions around what data sets we do want to have access to. And I think one of the concerns, frankly, is over, as we integrate into systems, ensuring the proprietary data sets that we have, ensuring that that they stay within our walls, but take advantage of the technology. I think a second area that you might be surprised at is, it hasn't been all that long ago that we had EMRs and EHRs that actually came in. And so Irene and I were just talking beforehand, like some data sets still aren't structured. So we do need to make sure that we continue to have the right processes in place to be able to organize your data and get access to that. Because I really do believe that the quality is based off of the data that you have. Even if it is small sample sizes, I'd rather take our energy and ensure that it's into the quality of the data.
Absolutely. Yeah, so one of the things that distinguishes our industry from so many others is the high degree of regulation, and because of that, it's very, very conservative, because we're dealing with patients' lives, and I think that Theranos is a perfect example of that, where, this old, the fake it till you make it, normal mode in Silicon Valley, that doesn't fly here. Absolutely not, right? Because again, we're dealing with patients' lives and data. So here, we need to have the regulatory guardrails in terms of data privacy, and well, for one thing, and data security is a concern for everybody, but here in particular, because again, you're dealing with very sensitive patient data. And on top of that, biopharma companies are all the time getting hit by potential hackers. I know this was an issue at J&J where, people are trying to break in all the time. And I think I just saw yesterday, Merck finally has got their decision in their court's favor, where I don't know if you will recall a few years ago, they were hacked and were basically shut down for about 5 days. And all R&D was frozen. And yesterday they got the court judged in their favor for $1.4 billion. So I think that should be a really good teachable moment for everybody about how vulnerable our industry is in particular.
So
right?
I imagine you would say, just like other industries, industry is probably ahead of the regulators. I mean, I remember 10 years ago at Mobiquity, we were actually educating the FDA on what a mobile app was. And that was before the FDA. Now they have a mobile medical directorate, and they're now starting to stand up an AI directorate, but they are behind, like most regulators. So it is incumbent on industry to regulate ourselves.
We do, but the good thing is that they are totally behind it, and actually just about a month or so ago, they released, CEDA released, that's part of the FDA, released a white paper on AI and biomanufacturing, and they actually want to encourage the industry to have data as part of their NDA and BLA submissions for drugs, because that actually de-risks the whole, the drug itself.
So there's movement. So I think we're getting to that 5-minute mark. So I want to open it up for Q&A and give an opportunity to folks in the audience to ask the panel any questions. It's so dark in here. We got to see if anybody's brave enough to step up to the microphone.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, while we're waiting for some brave soul, one thing that hasn't been mentioned today is the just wearables, et cetera, and other metrics, patient-specific metrics, because the other application of AI, which can make a huge difference to clinical development and then the drug use itself, is what's called patient stratification and monitoring. So basically, you can use multivariate data from a patient to see, should that patient go in your clinical trial? Do they have a chance of benefiting? And just through that stratification, that'll shorten your trials and decrease the cost and increase the probability of success. And then you use that same kind, similar tools for monitoring the patient to see, how are they doing? Is the drug helping them? And you can get that longitudinal data, which is really important, as opposed to just a couple of, metrics like start, finish, boom, you failed, right? And that's what happens today. And then by the same token, you can use similar metrics afterwards when the patient's actually, once the drug's been approved. And this is important also for payers, especially when you're talking about value-based pricing of drugs. If you're asking for a huge amount of money for your drug, well, you kind of, I think the demand now is, it's like, well, show me that it works. And so having real-world evidence is really important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a huge part of where AI is already working hard in the background in life sciences, finding patients, hopefully addressing health equity. Can we get a more diverse patient population for trials or even into the product? And then, being able to measure outcomes and interpret those. So Matt, you were going to jump in on that real quick.
Yeah, if you were to fast forward probably a decade from now, we're actually going to look back and say how archaic our healthcare system has been. We're really moving to personalized medicine. And as part of that, though, the exciting part is thinking about clinical trials truly having an opportunity now. How many companies are coming forward with evidence utilizing virtual trials? That is basically bringing the trial to the into the homes, into the geographies around the world where there may be underserved actually patient populations, or areas where we haven't had that opportunity because traditionally it's been difficult to be able to reach those patients. So it's really exciting to see that we're going to have more evidence coming out to be able to help us make clinical decisions on a more personalized basis.
And that's where bringing those data sets, not just EHR, but claims, social determinants data, lifestyle data, wearable, all that together can have a huge impact. So any other questions in the audience? Do we have any more? Oh, we got one. Thank you.
One thing I was hoping you guys could comment on is the intersection of experience. So you've talked about patient experience, provider experience, along with the efficacy of the treatments, right? So for the longest time, it's been which treatment will work best, I'll do whatever I need, where now we're seeing different healthcare providers and even pharmaceutical companies or PBMs start to compete deeper on the experience in which they can offer. So if you could comment on that intersection and how you see that playing out potentially with AI and machine learning, helping that along or inhibiting it.
So this notion of experience around the pill, around the drug or therapy, I think it's a great question. So anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think first of all, something that's changed in pharmaceutical companies is truly looking at the full end-to-end experience and seeing how we can use wearables to be able to track information around patients, to be proactive. Like, let's take the example of adherence. Especially in oncology, there may be an ability to be able to identify the potential progression of a side effect, be able to manage that in advance of the need to be able to titrate the product, or worse, have to take the patient off of product.
Yeah. 50% of prescribing decisions are not related to drug efficacy. It's everything else, right? So we have about a minute left. Real quickly, what you're most excited about, what you're scared most about? Irene.
Oh gosh, I'm most excited about the potential. I mean, we're just at the very, very, start of this gigantic opportunity. So I think awesome. It's amazing. And if I were a student today, this would be where I would go, because this is going to be, I think, the wave of the future. Cool. In terms of what I'm nervous about, it's, I think the limitation of the data and making, think about ChatGPT gone awry when you're talking about
can we upgrade the quality of the data? Yeah. Matt?
The speed to which this is moving is actually extremely exciting, but also at the same time, it's a little scary too. Yeah. So I think through around what's the adoption of the workforce itself, ensuring that it can take full advantage of what these capabilities are, but also ensuring that you have the teams educated well enough that they can ultimately be successful.
Great comment. Sean?
I'm most excited about enterprise large language models and federated training. That will happen. You'll see it'll be a big milestone. I'm most concerned that we as healthcare are going to act too slow, and we are not going to adopt it faster than other industries, and we're going to be in the same situation as we have before.
I'm excited and fearful about this transforming patient education. I think it will become the new intermediary. People won't go to WebMD anymore. They're going to go to a more intelligent platform to aggregate all the things they should know as a patient about managing their own disease and finding new therapies. So I'm excited about that. I'd like to thank the panel and give them a big hand. Thanks.